Peace and love, family. We're going to decode the words Yahweh and Yahuwah. In the Hebrew culture, this is called the Tetragrammaton. First of all, the Tetragrammaton does not originate from the Hebrew language or culture, and you cannot explain or decode the Tetragrammaton using Hebrew. And on top of that very critical point, the Tetragrammaton doesn't even represent what Hebrew scholars say it does. It actually represents the divine supremacy of the black race. And way back in the day, the Tetragrammaton was originally taught to non-black people as a reminder that they owe their entire existence to black people, and that eventually in the last days they must be ruled by black people in order to reach their highest potential. This is straight facts, and it's very obvious when we read the Tetragrammaton using the correct languages. As you can see on the chart below, long before modern day Hebrew, the Tetragrammaton was expressed in written format in several cultures that predate modern Hebrew by over 1,000 years. As you see at the very top, the Proto-Sinaitic is the oldest one listed at 1863 to 1200 BC. But what if I told you that the Tetragrammaton even predates the Proto-Sinaitic by over 2,000 years? Which of course brings us right back to the Royal African languages that was used in ancient Egypt. What you see here is the Tetragrammaton written in the Egyptian hieroglyphs. And what these white people don't know is that when you're reading the hieroglyphs, it's best to use one of the 12 original languages like Sewana, which became modern day Setswana. Sewana was a royal language. It was not spoken around common people, only when royals were in the room by themselves. So now we're ready to decode the Tetragrammaton using an original language of Sewana and a priesthood language of Kabiru. Alright, so let's start with Sewana. The root word of the Tetragrammaton is Huehu. Huehu means pale or dead. The word Huehu was used by our ancestors to identify pale people or white people. And just like pale grass that lacks color, the word Huehu also means dead or death. It's where the modern Setswana word Sweu comes from. And that's confirmed with this artifact where our ancestors described a land that they called Tachuso Yahuehu. It means the dreadful land of pale people, or the dreadful land of those who die, or simply the dreadful land of death. As you see the European with his arms tied behind his back, he comes from that land, and that's most likely that Turkey, Syria area that I told y'all about was the ancient stronghold of the synagogue of Satan, literally the places where like the Anunnaki and those people were doing unspeakable crimes against humanity, having slaves, having all kinds of destruction going on back in that region. That was Tachuso Yahuehu. So when white people started saying Yahweh, they actually butchered the word Yahuehu, which is the original way that white people used to pronounce it. But even they butchered the original way that black people taught it to them, which was Yabahuehu. Yabahuehu means king of pale people or king of dead people, or I like to say king of zombies, because white folks are the real zombies. Now, Yabahuehu was the black man who actually taught us how to breed white people into existence. It was his idea that actually caused the suppression of the dominant black gene in the body and actually removed it completely to create light-skinned people or pale people. Now, he's the one that our sacred traditions blame for unleashing evil onto the planet. However, when ancient white people learned about him, they ended up worshiping him as their god. Thus, Yahuehu became the father and god of the devil. Yes, Esau, yet he was just another brother in the black nation. Now, Yabahuehu was not evil himself. He was just a brother with the destiny to let the devil out the cage, because it had to be done and somebody had to do it, and he was just the one. And y'all can read the True Israelites chapter in the Black Root Science to get deeper insight about that. Now we're going to decode the Tetragrammaton with the ancient language of the Kabiru. Now it's very important to know that the word Kabiru actually means black people, and the K is interchangeable with H, so Kabiru is actually where the word Hebrew comes from. Now, why is this important? Because the Tetragrammaton is actually found in the Kabiru language, and when we analyze the definition, it corroborates the earlier traditions that we get from the Sewana. Now, understanding the cultural context in this situation is very important. About 4,000 years ago, the Kabiru people were located in the Palestine-Israel area, and these were the people who were teaching these white folks about monotheism back at that time. Now, this is the time period where they start using the word Yahuwah. However, once again, they butchered the original pronunciation. You see, the problem was the Neanderthal DNA that was found inside of these ancient white folks who were coming into Egypt around 4,000 years ago. It was at a much higher higher concentration than you find in white people today. So these people back in that time were basically stupid. They had a very tough time pronouncing words, so it was hard for them to learn our languages, and they naturally butchered all of our words. So in the Kabiru language, the Tetragrammaton is actually pronounced YACUB, which simply means me. However, they couldn't pronounce the K, so they ended up saying Yahuwah. Now, this is actually very deep because our ancestors are known to have coded information inside of the names that they use for certain deities. Because if we analyze and consider what the Tetragrammaton means to the non-black races, it actually represents the highest concept of their entire reality, period. It's the highest example of anything in the world that they can emulate or aspire to become like, but is actually impossible for them to accomplish. So when white folks say they want to be more like Yahuwah, you're actually saying you want to be more like me. But wait a minute, check this out. Now, I told you they butchered our languages, and that's how sounds, words, and entire languages evolved over time. So thousands of years later, certain white folks would replace the W sound with the V sound, therefore making YHWH cognate with YHVH. That's where the word Jehovah or Yahovah comes from. Also, YKWH also becomes cognate with YKVH. Now, this is where it gets interesting, because the V sound is also interchangeable with the B sound in linguistics. So YKVH is cognate with YKBH, and YKBH legitimately brings us to YACUB, and YACUB is Jacob in the Bible. Now, Jacob in the book of Genesis chapter 30 was the one who separated the dark-skinned goats from the light-skinned goats and essentially created a new flock of purely light-skinned goats. Now, that flock symbolizes the human body, and what Jacob did by removing the dark-skinned goats from that flock symbolizes the removal of the black gene in the human body to create the modern day white man and woman as we know them today. Which brings us right back to the beginning of the priesthood's sacred traditions over 3,000 years before the story of Jacob was written, to Kosi Yabahuehu, the king of the pale people, or the king of the people of death. So not only are the names still cognate despite being 3,000 years apart, but the narratives associated with those cognate names are also still discernibly cognate as well. The major key to know is that not only did our enemies come in and intentionally change up information to throw us off, but also the righteous prophets and the righteous sages also remixed old narratives and told the stories in new ways. So the story of Jacob, the way that it's written in the King James Version, cannot be taken literally for face value because that person never actually existed. However, he is a 3,000 year later rendition of a real brother who did walk this earth. The brother y'all call Yahweh, we call Kosi Yabahuehu or Yahweh.